Got the carburetor. I'm gonna put that in because it needs a new carburetor. Doesn't run very long. And we're trying to clean up around here. We got all kinds of lumber. We're gonna build a house out here eventually. Soon, hopefully. And yeah, we're clearing out an area here for a yard, and I'm gonna have a road or a trail coming along here. This is gonna be a fenced in chicken coop. I got all the wire, and we're gonna have fruit trees planted along here. Maybe I'm thinking have water system going through. And there's who this is. This is Woodstock. Hi, Woodstock. You got lots of hair, huh? Where's your brother Bucky? There's old Buster. Where's Bucky? Where's Bucky? Oh, there's Bubba. Hi, Bubba. Come on. On your little one. Yeah, looks like a German Shepherd, huh? Coloring of her mama. And Bubba. Woodstock. Where's Bucky? Bucky! There he is. There's Bucky. Come here, Bucky. Hi, Bucky. There's a Bucky boy. Well, that's what's going on today. I'm burning some brush and stuff, and it's finally spring. In fact, it feels like summer, and the roosters are crowing, and well, the dogs are lazy, laying around, sleeping. And friends, I want to do a video today that I think is going to be really enlightening and educational. And I think we need this video right now. We need to think about these things at the moment. Because of the fact I believe we are in the Great Tribulation. I think we're at the beginning of the Great Tribulation. But there's a lot of people that are saying, but Dave, I still don't understand, and I don't blame you. This is a complex thing. Understanding what the book of Revelation is really talking about. I'm going to go over a few things that I understand. Some of things I've understood for a long, long time. And I don't know why. I mean, it seems like the Lord showed me a lot of this when I was younger, but I didn't know when all of this was going to happen, because I find that what I'm seeing is that all of these prophecies were sealed up. Remember how we said that the whole book was written for those upon whom the ends of the system of things has come. All of this is a warning for those upon whom the ends of the world has come. That's what it's saying. It's a warning, and it's written for them. And we've found, and I believe, you can go back to some of those videos we did, that even the Old Testament and the New Testament, all of it's written for us. But how is it that it could be written for us, upon whom the ends of the world has come? And remember, there's ages last 2,000 years. And it's been 2,000 years since Jesus. So in the days of Jesus, there was an end of an age at that time. And I believe that age ended in 70. But we're going to talk today about why it seems so logical that it all was fulfilled in 70, and yet it's still being fulfilled today. Now, preterists will say it was all fulfilled, done, finished by 70. So therefore the kingdom of God is here. Yes, but the Antichrist has not yet risen. Now, why did John say, we know it is the last hour? For many Antichrists have arisen. So the Apostle John says that the Antichrist would rise at the last hour. And the last hour is the Great Tribulation. But yet, I'm saying that we're going through the Great Tribulation now. I actually believe that the Great Tribulation refers to several things, at least three, and I'm sure more. And I'll explain why I believe that and how it's fulfilled in layers. And we need to unpeel this onion. And we're going to explain why it would be that way. And just to give you a little hint as to why we know that, I mean, or how it could be that one thing could be translated or understood several ways. You'll notice that in the book of Revelation, you'll see there are 7 churches, and then there's 7 candles, and then there are 7 spirits and 7 eyes. And then we go, I think, to 7 seals, and then to 7 thunders, and 7 trumpets, and 7 bowls of wrath, and 7 last plagues, and, it goes on with 7s. And if you'll notice, he'll go to 6, and then when he opens the 7th, he doesn't open it. He leaves that for later. But then he opens something else at the end of the 6th of something, then they go into 7 more something else's. And so it's almost as if the 7 thunders are the 7th seal. And the 7th thunder are the 7 trumpets. And the 7th trumpet is the 7 plagues and that kind of thing. So if that were the case, then you would find that everything that you need to interpret the Bible is in the Bible. It's very odd how all this stuff is there when we get back and look at it. But in order, it seems, to understand this, you need several things. One, you need to read it over and over and over again, and you need to understand from Genesis to Revelation, because everything that John writes is not a new prophecy. He is simply rewriting the words of the prophets. And all the prophets were until John. And from then on, the kingdom of deity is being pursued. And he who is greater in the kingdom is greater than John, even though that no one born from a woman was greater than John. So something happened in Jesus' day. And in Jesus' day, there was the end of an age. And so this was written for them, and it was written for us. But yet you couldn't say that it was just written for them in the first century, and that was the end of their age, and it was written for us, and not written by Jeremiah himself. When he spoke to Jerusalem, he was speaking to them. So it was written specifically to people 600 years BC, when those prophets were there speaking to them. But it was prophetic of something that would happen and have a grand fulfillment at the end of the age in Jesus' day. Now, I think everybody can get on board with the idea, even the preterists. I saw somewhere where somebody was talking about preterism the other day, just by chance, and he was saying that one of the things they say is that all these things must be fulfilled in this generation. Number one, it doesn't say generation. It says gen. This will all be fulfilled upon this people. We find this also in Daniel, where he says, this prophecy is upon thy people and thy city and thy temple. The angel's always telling Daniel, the prince of thy people is Michael, and this is going to happen to thy people. And Jesus said there will be wrath upon this people, saying that what Daniel wrote was to be fulfilled upon this people. So it couldn't have been fulfilled, any of this, in the book of Revelation, in the literal sense, or in all the prophets, could not have been fulfilled, say, 1000 AD, after Christ. Because thy people were scattered into all the world. There were no people. There was no temple. There was no Jerusalem. There was no Israel. They were scattered into the world. Now the prophecies were waiting to be fulfilled. In fact, the whole point of prophecy is your people. So Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel, those guys said, look, we're in the days 600 BC. We're the prophets, and we're going to say this. It's all going to happen that you're going to go into the wilderness. This is why you're going. This is why you're being punished. This is why you're being scattered. Then these people like Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel said, at some point, this is what's going to happen to you. I'm going to have you return. So you look at the book of Hosea, and it says Jesus would come. There would be a former reign. It would get the Holy Spirit. And then he would go away and come back again after 2 days. And on the third day, he'll raise us up and we'll get the latter rain. So it even tells you in certain places exactly what the prophets are trying to do here. The prophets themselves are actually saying that it's very difficult because you got to read the whole prophecy and understand what you're reading as you're reading it. They're saying this is what you're going to do now, 600 BC. Then you're going to come back in the first century. Jesus is going to come and you're going to reject him. There's lots of scriptures in Isaiah talks about him and his disciples and him, a body hast thou prepared for me. And all this is fulfilled in the first generation. But all the prophets wrote 600 BC. All fulfilled, Jesus says, in this people, with this gen or this gene, this family, this race. But the race went away, but now it's back again. Since 1948, there's a nation over there. It could be fulfilled again, but why? Well, it actually says in Daniel. It says there's a 3.5-year period upon thy people to bring an end of sin, was the meaning of the prophecy. That the Messiah would be anointed, that he would come, that he would anoint the holy place, that he would make an end of sin, which Jesus did on the cross, that he would bring in all everlasting righteousness, what he did on the cross by his teachings and by his covenant, and that there would be this final revelation of this man of sin so we could awaken. But that would be the last 3.5 years. So this 490 years would be upon thy people and not upon, it's not written specifically to the Gentiles. So the understanding in Jesus' day was that there was Israel and then there was the nations. They didn't know that the fulfillment, that the Lord had a plan, that the nations were his people. And they were going to come in and somehow or another be part of the fatness of the root. They also were Israel, but that was a mystery. But at that time, they were just looking at there's Israel and there's the Gentiles. Now, in order for all Israel to be saved, Paul says the Gentiles need to come in. So that's why we've got this 2,000-year span where there was what was written upon by the prophets to thy people and thy temple, and the mystery of how the Gentiles would come in, and then the last 3.5 years would return, where it would all be fulfilled. John sees the great multitude of all nations. He says, who are these, my Lord? He said, well, they have come out of great tribulation. So they've washed their robes in the blood of the Lamb. They're not just the 144,000, 12,000 from each tribe of Israel, but a great multitude which no man can number. Where do they come in? Well, that's the mystery of why there's a 2,000-year period in between these 3.5-year periods. 3.5, then a 2,000-year period, and 3.5. That was cut or divided off, or else all the peoples of the world would not be saved because the Gentiles weren't saved yet. So the gospel had to be preached. And the Lord's not slow, but he's patient. And this is why Peter said there will be 2 days, 1,000 for the day and 1,000 for the night, which is 2,000 years, quoting Psalms 90. But that's just me stating that that's the truth. I'm going to explain that over the next couple, 2 or 3 videos as we do a series here in depth to show you that this is truly and indeed what the Bible is trying to say. Yes, it's very difficult to follow it. 7 vials and 7 trumpets and 7 this and 7 that. And, it's all very difficult. But I will show you that we're not just imagining this. This is a parable, and it requires interpretation and understanding. And this is why it says, but he who has wisdom count the number of the beast. Not everybody can just read that and understand it. But let he who have wisdom, somebody, which is his anointed Christians who are enlightened and spend time in prayer and don't just read a bunch of apostate literature, but, some satanic literature that says, oh, the Bible's not true, but they have studied on their knees, praying for years, and the Lord has drawn them to a place where they have a testimony of Jesus Christ, and they're preaching for that reason and not to discredit the Bible. So the 10 tribes went into the Gentile nations and were planted like seed, as it says in Hosea. And when they're regathered, it's this great miracle that even John says is a miracle when he sees this great multitude coming in. And see, that didn't happen in the first century. When John saw this great multitude, this is in the book of Revelation, chapter 7, he's like, who are these, my Lord? This did not happen in the first century. Because that's the fulfillment, the grand fulfillment. When he sees a great multitude of all nations, the Gentiles, and yet they partake of the root, as Paul says, of the tree, or the family line of this kingdom. This is a good example here. The great multitude prophecy was given and fulfilled several times, and we can prove that. So this will help us to see how each and every one of these things is fulfilled several times. Okay, so we can go back to the days when Moses was leading the children of Israel out of Egypt. And he leads them out, and they get to the edge of the land, where they're going to go into the promised land. And this is the book of Numbers, where they number them. And there was 12,000 from each tribe, and they were all on these horses. And there was the battalions, and they were around in a circle. And they were holding up banners. Well, the horses were filled with specifically individuals from each tribe, and some of them had 12,000, some had 13,000, some had 11,000, but it was it was kind of like 12,000 from each. But behind them, in the rear guard, was a mixed multitude. Okay, so that was a fulfillment of prophecies that had gone before. I mean, Joseph had prophesied before all of this, and Jacob had prophesied a lot of this in the last chapter of Genesis. And he blessed each of the tribes and said what they were going to do and how they were going to do it, some things. And some of those things were fulfilled in the days of Moses. So then you come down to the days of Christ, when he was on the earth. And you see there are 12 apostles, and there are 12 tribes. And Jesus taught them. They were with him. And when he dies, he said, I'm sending you to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. That means they weren't sent to Judah because they weren't lost. I've said before that, in a sense, Judah was the one that was really lost, right? So that's kind of an interesting twist on that. But in this sense, I think the lost sheep of the house of Israel are the 10 tribes, the 10 lost tribes. Now, everybody's always saying, remember how the Apostle Paul wasn't really an apostle because he wasn't one of the original 12. But if you need 12, and you do, because there are 12 houses and there's forever and ever, the kingdom's going to have 12 gates and 12 doors. And if Judas fell and went to his own place, then who was Judas going to be the apostle for out of the 12 tribes? Would be Judah. Well, if he's gone, we need somebody else to go to Judah, right? And we're probably going to need somebody to go to the Gentiles too. They're not part of the 12, supposedly, except in the end, it's this mystery. They're going to come out and share the fatness because he mixes the tribes in with the Gentiles and they all become one lump. But it's interesting that the Apostle Paul went to the Jews and then to the Greeks, or the Gentiles. But he says the gospel had to go to the Gentiles in order for all Israel to be saved. So perhaps Paul couldn't have seen everything and been right there with Jesus during his 3.5-year ministry, because the person who was there, one of the apostles, actually apostatized and went to his own place, and they had to replace with somebody that was going to take the gospel to the Jews, who was a Jew, someone who was a Judean, or from the tribe of Judah or Benjamin, and the Apostle Paul was. And he was a rabbi, so he could teach rabbis. He could explain these things. The other disciples went to the other nations. So here are these 12 apostles, I guess 11, because Judas went to his own place, hung upside down. But they went. Now we know that Peter went to Babylon. We know that Philip went to Ethiopia. We know that Thomas went to India. And so they went all around the world. But Paul says he went to the Jews. And then he went to the Gentiles. And then sometimes he says the Jews and the Greek, or the Jew first and the Greek second. But in that day when Jesus was there, he didn't have, when he arrived and he started and got his disciples, he didn't have 12,000 from each tribe. But I would say that Jesus went forward and preached and gathered 12 apostles and then 72 also to start some kind of, it has to begin. You start with one, and then that one turned, like the 12 turned into 120. And I think by the end of the first century, there was 144,000. Now, the great multitude hadn't come in then. When Jesus was on the earth, he preached to Israel. Those knew their genealogy. And it wasn't in Judea, there wasn't just Judeans, Levites and Benjamites. There were a remnant of other tribes. But right after Christ died, there was a short period of time, and then the gospel went to the Gentiles. So there you go, the group that is the 144,000, and then the Gentiles. And so Peter fulfills, or does again, sometimes I think we don't know what it means to fulfill. It's like something is said to happen, and then it happens. That's how it's fulfilled. But sometimes it happens in different ways. Sort of symbolically or spiritually. And we'll talk about what it means to occur spiritually. So in the days of Christ, we know that there was the Israel itself, which you would say the 144,000. And by the time that first century was over, I suppose there was 144,000. Why do we say then that the 144,000 are on the earth in our day? Because everybody's on the earth in our day. The 144,000, that's why we are going to get victory. Because we already took up our cross and followed him. Many of the martyrs that died gave their lives. And now, we all must appear before the judgment seat of Christ. So we're all here now, again. But we, the 144,000, are the first fruits. And we were first because Christ literally gave us the Holy Spirit on the day of Pentecost. And so in that first century, there were 144,000 who had already accepted and received the gospel and are predestined then to be here for victory this time. But we'll get to that probably in another one of these videos that we're going to do in this series. Perhaps there was a great multitude that heard the gospel, but what are they going to do? They believed, they were good people. There might have been many, many multitudes of people around the world by the time John on the Isle of Patmos wrote that book. So perhaps it was fulfilled like that. But that's not the greatest fulfillment. Jonah preached to Nineveh, they repented. But that was typical. It was a type, a shadow of Peter giving the gospel to the Gentiles. Because Peter went to Joppa, just like son of Jonas. Peter, the son of Jonas, went to Joppa because he didn't want to give the gospel to the Gentiles. So there it was a type. Things that were similar happened again in another way. So we've got that way. But therefore, something happened in the days of Moses with a great multitude, with 144,000, that was a type of something else. Now, when Jesus came the first time, he was trying to fulfill, or it was being fulfilled. He was there, and they should know that these things were happening and that it was prophetic because they had happened in other types and shadows in the past. So there are two fulfillments, major fulfillments of everything. The first coming and the second coming. I think we'll understand that better as we go along. But there are many times that these things happened. Weren't necessarily fulfillments, but like the great multitude coming out, the mixed multitude coming up out of Egypt, that happened, in a sense, fulfill prophecy, but it wasn't the final. They didn't get eternal salvation. They just got saved from Egypt. So that was a type, and Egypt was a type. Okay, and so salvation is the fulfillment when it's all said and done. Now, there were things that happened when Jesus came the first time that was all said and done. It was a fulfillment. Jesus came, sacrificed his life, and we were cleansed. And that's why we know that the first chapter of Revelation is spiritual, because he starts right off in the first chapter saying he's like a high priest trimming the wicks inside the temple, and the 7 candles, which is in your body, which we've talked about many times, means the 7 chakras. And so in the Old Testament, there was a real temple, a literal temple. And in the prophets, things happened that were typical. In the first centuries, things came about to fulfill in a literal way the prophecies. They've got to be fulfilled in a literal way, or else why were these types used? Why did we have the Old Testament and the shadows and the types, so that when the reality came, the reality and the literalness, like for instance, it has to be a literal church, there has to be a literal salvation, there has to be a literal fulfilling of the Holy Spirit. Okay, but when David got the Holy Spirit, he may have been playing a part to act out what would happen to what? To one group or one person? No, the fulfillment, which is all the nations, which is salvation to man. The earth is redeemed. That's the final. So why then would the Bible be written 600 BC by prophets? When that's done and over with, they didn't have a Bible. It really didn't do them any good. The words of the Lord that was being spoken to them is all that made any difference. They didn't have a book. So why was it written for us? Why do we have a book telling us what happened 600 BC? Because the things that happened to them, that befell them, the apostles said, was a warning upon whom the ends of the system have come. And there's 2 ends, because it's plural. There's the first coming and the second coming. So you preterists, if you think it was all fulfilled in the first coming, and then that generation, then you're not understanding that the point of the Bible, whether it be the Old Testament prophets or John, the Revelator, who wrote 100 AD, was for the grand fulfillment. Now, the grand fulfillment may be a spiritual fulfillment, and everything that happened before was types and shadows and literal things that represented spiritual things. What's a spiritual thing? Well, a literal temple that's cleansed, and the spiritual temple, which is the home that we live in. And it could be various stages of that. Your body is a temple, and everything that's in the temple is in your body. So everybody who's ever lived in the last 2,000 years who's reading the Bible, they could apply it to their own body. You could say that this body is your personal body. And when it's talking about your personal body, it's going to have the courtyard, which is the material, the outside, and it's going to have the inner spiritual. Well, that can apply to anything. You have a spiritual heart of a community, and the material structure of that community, the laws of that community, maybe the buildings. But the grand fulfillment is the complete one, that our Heavenly Father built a temple for the spirits of men to live in, the creation. And the creation is the material outside wall, and inside the creation, there's the being. So that's the grand fulfillment. Now, the book of Revelation is primarily a spiritual book. All the prophets wrote prophecies with types and shadows that was fulfilled from time to time in different ways. But each and every one of those fulfillments weren't, I don't even know if we should call them fulfillments. They were also things that happened as types. So what happened to Jacob and Esau had already happened to Cain and Abel, because it always keeps happening. So some of the types keep happening over and over again. Sometimes it'll happen to Judah itself, then it'll happen to Israel, then it happens to the whole nation or to a one person. What Elijah did and the widow in the famine was a type of what perhaps the whole body of believers and preachers, as the Elijah class, is going to do at a certain particular time. And just like Elijah demonstrated the efficiency of following the true deity, and how Jezebel and Baal worship was wrong and defeated those Baal worshipers, that was a type, an ongoing type, to be as an example for people whenever they would read this. The problem is most people never read the Bible until the first century, and then they was reading the Old Testament. But there was part of all of these types and shadows, that was part of it that was fulfilled when Jesus came the first time. And that is the first three, it's symbolized by the first three holidays, the Passover time, up to Pentecost. Then you've got a latter-day fulfillment when Jesus returns, the latter rain. And that is the greater fulfillment of Pentecost, and then the Festival of Atonement and the Festival of Booths. Now, that's not going to happen, even though it's a fulfillment, when the other fulfillment's happening in the first century. So Jesus literally came to fulfill the prophecies about the coming of the Messiah. And in that day, there was a literal Jesus, and they chose literal 12 disciples or apostles and the literal 72, which was on a small scale in Israel. And there would be this grand fulfillment of the ingathering. So the book of Revelation was written 100 AD. It has to be primarily about the ingathering. It has to be primarily about the latter days, not the millennial or the little season at the end of the millennial, because that has nothing to do with these two principal fulfillments, which is the first three great holidays and the last three great holidays, which are separated, one in the spring and one in the fall. It represents the things that happened when Jesus came and the things that are going to be fulfilled and happen today. So that's why in our day there are literal things that are going to happen. So that 3.5 years is the only part that anything of note really is going to be fulfilled. Because in Daniel's prophecy, it says there'll be 490 years. Everything that happened in those 490 years is really irrelevant. They don't talk about things that are supposed to happen during that time. It's just the nitty gritty is the last 7 years. And that's what's going to be fulfilled. So the 490 is just to let us know that there would be a length of time before this started the fulfillment. And the fulfillment starts with the coming of the Messiah. And it would go for 3.5 years. And Jesus had a 3.5 year ministry, brought in everlasting righteousness. So that happened literally to fulfill the prophecy literally. But it was also happening spiritually, because when he died, he was cleansing his body, his physical body, but also his church, also the world. He was going to redeem the universe, all the people in our earth. And it's something that is much bigger than that, but we won't get into it, because the angels got white robes too, right? But what are they? Priests, right? They're ministers unto us, to whom is going to be salvation. Yeah, there's a lot that we're not going to get into here. But so let's take a look at what's going on in the first century. Literally, Jesus came to fulfill the prophecy. There were literal things. A body hast thou prepared for me. His body. He literally died. There was a literal anointings. Mary anointed him for his burial. Things happened literally that was said to happen in Psalms. But also, when Jesus died and all the things he was doing, it wasn't really about his literal body, even though it was happening. They could see it. They could see Mary as a fulfillment. They could see the virgin birth as a fulfillment of Isaiah 9. But the real virgin birth is the explanation of it is the universe, which is infinite and gives birth to its children. The real body that died is the physical universe, the creation that groaneth together in pain until now, waiting for the revealing of the sons of deity. So the spiritual significance of all the prophets, even the ones before Christ, the 12 minor prophets and the 4 major prophets, they prophesied of things that would happen literally. Some of those things would happen literally in Jesus' day, and some of them would happen literally in our day. So lots of things was fulfilled in the first century. But why would then all these things be fulfilled in this generation? Again, as I've said, it's not a generation. It's a race. And as Daniel was told, upon thy people. So the last 3.5 years is going to be fulfilled in much the same way the first 3.5 years was. And this generation includes then and now, because it's the same genera or race. And the miracle is that not only did the prophecy have a long period of time between the 2 3.5 year periods, the 3.5 years ministry of Christ until he died, took away sacrifices and all that, and the last 3.5 years that the Antichrist reigns, and the abomination and the desolation, and the coming of Christ, and all of these things. Those are going to happen literally, just like they saw a literal Jesus, they saw a literal church, they saw a literal preaching work, they saw literal buildings dying. Okay, now we're going to have literal again. They went and did a literal red heifer. Because the first 3.5 years was fulfilled in Jesus. And if you understand that, then you understand that the last 3.5 years is going to be again on this race and wrath upon this people. Both of them are spiritual and both of them are literal. So the first century was literal things for a spiritual significance, because we all spiritually needed to be cleansed, not just the church, but the whole congregation of the world, the great multitude, everybody. So everything that Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread and Pentecost spoke of was a shadow of things that happened literally when Jesus came to fulfill it. And Jesus said, not one jot or tittle will by no means pass away until all be fulfilled. It doesn't mean, you're not talking about keeping laws. He's talking about the fulfillment of the law. It was a shadow. It needed to be fulfilled. Even law is something that needs to be fulfilled. But the only way to fulfill it is to have eternal righteousness brought in. Because if the literal or the temples and the sacrifices were made to cleanse us, then that's the meaning. They weren't made to be done as a ritual. Oh, these rituals got to be done. That's the fulfillment. Must do the rituals. That's the whole purpose of all of these laws. No, the purpose of the laws wasn't to put us under a law forever and ever and ever. The purpose of the law was to demonstrate in a typical way. It told us what we were going to do in a ritualistic sense, in a typical shadow that meant nothing, just like a language means very little. What you do is what's important. So the law wasn't written to be perpetuated for eternity as a literal thing. It was meant to be understood as esoteric wisdom. To say, okay, what are we doing here? Cleansing the sanctuary. So what we need to do is have an eternal sacrifice to cleanse the sanctuary forever, so it doesn't have to be repeated ever again. So the first century, everything was fulfilled up to the first rain, the former rain, which was a type of what was happening at Pentecost. It was a small kind of ingathering, but it wasn't the great final latter rain, because they had 2 harvests. So it was supposed to be that way. And then the Festival of Booths and Atonement and all of that hadn't happened yet. So that has to happen literally. There has to be literally 2 witnesses. Think about what the book of Revelation is. I mean, just vaguely in your mind, think about chapter 12, the 1,260 days, the woman clothed the sun. Chapter 11, 1,260 days, where the 2 witnesses, prophesy, and there's a beast and a false prophet. Well, this is all that's prophesied to happen in the last 3.5 years. What happened in Jesus' day was a fulfillment of the prophecies in the first 3.5 years, the coming of Messiah and his death. Now we're looking at, in the book of Revelation, primarily, although it's going to say he's going to tell you about things that was and things that are and things that are to come. But it's primarily about the last 3.5 years, which is separated off. Now, even in a type, what happened in 66 to 70 was separated off from when Jesus was preaching by 40 some years, a generation later. So that was a type to show us that the last 3.5 years aren't consecutive. They come at the end. But the grand fulfillment of the last 3.5 years haven't happened because the great multitude didn't come in the first century. And Christ didn't return yet. Elijah must come back. Remember, Elijah came back in Jesus' day. He said, if you'll receive it, this is Elijah. So that happened literally. Elijah was typical. He did what he did, and he was to come again. And he did come literally again. But Jesus said, if you'll receive it, that is Elijah, who will come again. So he had come then, and he said, this is Elijah, and he will come again, Jesus said. This was Elijah, if you'll receive it, who is coming, who will come again. And so Elijah must come again, literally, because he must turn the hearts of fathers back towards sons on a grand universal basis. So I think this is what we have to keep in mind as we read this. So if you look at the book of Revelation chapter 1, you understand that as we go through, John is writing or rewriting, plagiarizing, you might say, little lines and pieces of prophecies from all the other prophets. If all of this that John is writing is not his own prophecy, but prophecies that have already been written 600 BC by many different prophets, we understand one thing about this. We understand that everything was already written before John wrote this. He's just rewriting it. But he writes it after it was already fulfilled in one way in 70. To show us that there's still another part of this that hasn't been fulfilled yet. And that it will probably have to happen in a sense, literally, because there was things that haven't happened yet, literally. And just as the first century had literal and was a spiritual significance, the latter part would have a spiritual significance. So, in a literal sense, half of everything that was said by the prophets were fulfilled when Jesus came the first time. In a literal sense, the other half will be fulfilled in our generation with the last 3.5 years. They had the first 3, we had the second 3. And that's the 7 years. But they were separated or cut and divided. Because if Jesus had let them run consecutively 7 years, if the Great Tribulation had arrived when Jesus died on that cross, and if he'd let these 3.5 years continue, no flesh would be saved, he says. And the reason for that is because when Jesus died on that cross, the nations were not ready. They hadn't heard the gospel. So that's why he says, until the Gentiles be come in, then all Israel will be saved. Because you had to take the gospel to the Gentiles. And when the Gentiles hear the gospel and they come in, then you can bring the last 3.5 years, which fulfills the Feast of Sukkot. In a literal sense, there's going to be literal things that the body of Christ is going to be here. There will be a literal 144,000 that will be standing. And just like the type with the mixed multitude, there's going to be a great mixed multitude behind them. And they're all going to be saved. And they're all going to get the same reward, eternal life. But the 144,000 are going to be the firstborn. And they're going to be the ones that are kind of the armies behind Jesus, because it's going to be a spiritual battle. But now let's start reading here in Revelation chapter 1. See what John himself says about it. He says it's a revelation of Jesus Christ, which deity gave unto him to show unto his servants things which must shortly come to pass. Now, that's one thing we should cover here, because this shortly come to pass, or soon coming of the Lord, is throughout the New Testament, and it's been mistranslated. The word there, if we had the time, I would click on it and show you the interlinear and the Greek word, but try to take my word for this. You can look it up later yourself. Shortly come to pass is the word swiftly, speedily. Now, if preterists are going to use that to say, well, it can't be today fulfilled, because it has to come back, be fulfilled shortly. Well, we've already talked about this generation means this race, and this race was then, and it's by miraculous 1948, it's here again. And this race is still, thy people is going to get the fulfillment of the literal and the spiritual, as we've said. Well, now we have to understand that the speedily, or the swiftness of what's going to happen, doesn't mean that it will happen soon, because if it did, when Jesus said these things, it didn't happen soon. Jesus spoke in like 27 AD. And Jerusalem wasn't destroyed physically until 70. That was 40 years later, over 40 years. So that's not quick. That's not soon. So that's not what the word means. It means the things that will happen swiftly, suddenly. And this is why you have to be careful and don't let it take you as a thief in the night. So if you're a homeowner and a thief comes, he does it suddenly and surprises you and steals everything. And you're not ready because you weren't waiting and you weren't watching. But that doesn't mean that if I told you that the thief might come someday, and when he comes, he's coming so quickly and shrewdly and speedily that you won't notice it and you won't be awake. I'm not saying he's coming soon. I'm saying when it happens, which is a long time from now, it will happen quickly and abruptly and suddenly, and you aren't going to be aware of it unless you're paying attention. That's what that word means. So that is not proof of preterism. Okay, so verse 2, who bear record of the word of deity and the testimony of Jesus Christ, and of all things that he saw. Blessed is he that readeth, and they that hear the words of this prophecy. So this is a prophecy, but yet he doesn't make a lot of prophecy on his own. Well, I guess there are some things in the book of Revelation could be considered just plain old John's particular prophecy. But he's basically quoting from all the prophets. So perhaps he's talking about the words of their prophecy. And so he says, and keep those things which are written therein, for the time is at hand. Now, there again is another expression. The time is at hand. Remember, we've said that all of these words, not just most of them, but all of them, were written under a certain context, under astrology, under the Greek myth. The little pictographs represented the 72 deities, and those 72 deities are the powers. So they're the fundamentals, and you put them together like little roots. Well, we'll get into that. I'm going to, I've got so much going on out here. I'm going to get to that video where we'll talk about the original language. But even this Greek language is very closely related to the original pictographs, far more than our English today, which is not related at all. We don't have any of these ancient thoughts. Once in a while, somebody will tell us about it, like, oh, that means missing the mark. It doesn't mean sin. Oh, what's missing the mark? Well, they don't tell you that. It has to do with astrology, and Orion has got a bow, and he's trying to hit the bullseye. And because he's coming up over the horizon, he's learning, he's growing, he's going through it. Anyway, all this is part of what these words mean. So we have these words that have become understood by us in English over periods of time that never were the meanings. So we've got all this time is short, time is at hand, not knowing these words. Now, this word time is at hand is what they claim if you look it up. We don't have time because we're going to run out of time in this video. They'll say it means near. The season, the time, or the moment is near. Because it could mean near in time or in space. So when I say near in English, I mean that there's something in physical space that's near me. And that would be relative to what I think near is. Like Albuquerque is near me because I live in New Mexico. But it's almost like 200 miles. So that's not really near, depending on... So that's a relative word. But in this sense, I don't think you could say that 2,000 years is near. However, this word doesn't even literally probably mean near in that sense. If you look it up, you'll see it's ego, like E-G-G-O or something, ego. And if you go one number in Strong's Concordance back, it's the same word, and they claim it means guarantee. Something that is certain, something that is absolutely guaranteed. So the word here, near, has a connotation of being something that is close to you in the sense that it's actually real and about to be. Not something far away spiritually, not even time and space, but far away as far as false, far from the truth. But it's so real. The words that he's speaking in this prophecy are guaranteed. And when they happen, they'll happen swiftly. These don't mean what these preterists are saying they mean. And they never meant what Christianity thought, because they said that the time is at hand in the Old Testament about things that happened hundreds of years later. So whatever this expression was in the Old and the New, it never meant something near. Because Jeremiah and Isaiah were talking about the time is at hand, the day of the Lord's coming, and blah, 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 blah. They've been doing this for a long time. It never meant it would be actually near or soon, because the words don't mean that. And for some reason, and I'll tell you, for one thing, I know beyond a doubt that the Bible was mistranslated in such a way that you can't understand it, but also in a way that they can't say it was mistranslated, because the actual words do mean kind of what they say they mean. I mean, you can look up roots and you can get kind of what, you can figure it out. But there's one thing. There's a whole part of the Bible that you never figure out. Because what they learned to do, because the original Bible was not written with syntax, and it didn't have vowels, some of it, and some of it didn't have periods and commas and question marks and exclamation marks. And so you didn't know where the chapter ended or began. And the other thing is, you didn't know where a word began and ended. It was just letters across the board. So what they did was they decided, this is the part of the Bible that's not inspired, the commas and the periods. And so they got us to believe that there were certain words that meant like Bob or something. So Strong's Concordance tells you that it has the root word, but they don't tell you about all the other words crammed onto the root word. And they just transliterate some of these as names and titles, when in actuality, they're supposed to be translated. So Abimelech should be Father Molech. Because we don't know that it's Father Molech, we don't know what's going on. And because we don't know that Anias is the city of Bethel, because of their translations, we don't know what the context, we don't know what's going on halfway. A lot of these words, like Elohim, they didn't translate it with a plural. They didn't want you to know there were all these deities. They didn't want you to understand what a deity was. These powers, they didn't say pleroma like the Gnostics or the archons, and even then, they didn't have to translate it because they spoke Greek. But we don't speak Greek now, so they translate it principalities and then leave it to us to just decide what a principality is, and we don't know. And then doctrines get started on this, and teachings and stuff. So what I'm saying is that there are lots of this kind of thing going on, and this is one of these words in the New Testament, like missing the mark, that we didn't understand. It had nothing to do with sin as we understand it. Like the Old Testament, transgression of the law. That's not what sin is to a Christian. For us, it's missing the mark. It's making a mistake. And we get up and we do it again. We try again. We're forgiven. It's not a big deal. It doesn't mean death. In fact, no one judges us. And in this case, it is near isn't even the word near. Maybe it was the same as another word that they use for near, but it had a connotation that we don't understand today. It could mean near in time or in space, or it could mean that it's guaranteed. And that's what it's saying here. But we don't understand the context. So John is not saying that this, and some of you might be saying, yeah, but that's a likely story, Dave. You know, that's just your idea, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're right. Because it says it in English, I'm going to continue to believe it actually said the time is at hand, and it lied, the Bible's not true. Well, this is what people like Billy Carson are doing, or Santos Bonacci, or Jeff Daughtry, or whatever. They're trying to put doubt in your mind about the Bible. The problem was that the churches wanted you to believe without having any evidence, without knowing any truth. Just blind faith. But now they've got these prophets that have arisen that want you to not believe. They want you to believe them because they're so wise and so smart, but the Bible's stupid, and don't believe in the Bible. And they give you all these little antidotes to prove that the Bible's wrong, but they don't understand the Bible. And I'm telling you that the Bible is the holy word of the divine. And if it is, as you say, you preterists, the time is at hand, meaning that it was supposed to be near, if that's what that word meant, then stop teaching the Bible. You don't believe in the Bible because it didn't happen. Even as a preterist, it didn't happen soon. When Jesus was on the earth, it happened 40 years later in 70. That's not soon. You see, but that's a type of the fact that the last 3.5 years, it happened in 66 to 70, was a small fulfillment as a type for the actual fulfillment that would happen the last 3.5 years as the great grand fulfillment. And I say the word grand because that's how the mysteries were explained. If you go to even the Masons today, and they don't understand why they're doing it, but they talk about the grand this and the grand that. It's examples of it's in the Bible where we see Babylon the Great. It's not Babylon, but Babylon the Great. It's not the literal Babylon, but it's the greater Babylon. So when I'm talking about fulfillments and grand fulfillments, that's what I'm saying. And the Bible has it in there. But you've got to be a scholar to understand this. Because we don't speak that language. If we were born speaking the language that it was written in, and it was written in that language, we'd understand it. And you have to be born to knowing the language as a living language, meaning that you understood the colloquialism and the symbolism and the context of these words. So nowhere in the New Testament does it say that Jesus is coming soon. He's coming suddenly, speedily. When it comes, it will be speedily. And it is near with something that the Old Testament prophets used as a phrase for things that were 300, 400, 500, 600 years later. to occur. And this is something that's been known by the rabbis, by all the scientists. Sir Isaac Newton, he wasn't an idiot. He understood that prophecy was written in such a way to be both symbolic and spiritual and literal and types and shadows. He said, well, that's ridiculous. You're just making all this up. No, this is how the Bible was written. It's a parable. Jesus said, I speak in parables. And friends, if you don't understand that it's written, and many of you are very humble and you're saying, look, I just don't understand, David. Don't get mad at me. Look, I'm not mad at anybody. But I am a little bit disappointed with individuals who claim to be teachers who don't know these principles of how to teach the Bible. They don't know about these connections. They don't know the context. They've studied for a year or two. Young bucks haven't even got their, diapers off. They're still on the milk. And they think they understand. And it's always invariably they decide, oh, guess what? I've studied for a year now and been reading night and day, all this apostate literature, all this satanic crap. And they've convinced me that the Bible's a pile of crap. It ain't true. So why are you teaching the Bible? Why is it your mission to get people to not believe in the ancient esoteric wisdom? Friends, if you can't understand astrology, those 12 little houses and all these little characters, and how would you understand the Bible? Because it is those characters. It is that teaching written in the stars. The gospel was written in the stars and is declared, and so that it was given to all nations. The Apostle Paul is telling you that the gospel that he preaches about Jesus and his dying for your sin is something that is akin to astrology. It was written in the stars. It's the ancient esoteric wisdom written in the pyramids. We've covered how Paul says that some of the Greek philosophers or poets were prophets. We've shown that Paul taught on the Sabbath in the synagogue, but he also taught outside of the temple of Artemis in the school of Tyrannus. And the school is the mystery schools, friends. And the Apostle Paul was in a cult or a sect. They called it that. The sect of the Nazarenes. And the leader of that was Jesus. And that sect was the descendants of Elijah, who made the school of the prophets. And that school of the prophets given to us by Elijah was sent into all the earth. But Elijah had predecessors. Moses, which was down in Egypt. And the mysteries came from Egypt. From Abraham, from Ur to Egypt. And Abraham was the first of the dynastic pharaohs. And this went down to Amun-Hoseph, which is not a deity, but it's Joseph, the son of Amun. And we're going to do another video about Amun too, because it's very important. And we've got to straighten out things that people like Billy Carson, he's doing a lot of damage. And I love him as a person. I think he's a great guy, but he's misunderstanding. He thinks he's now a prophet, and he thinks he's a great scholar, and he's understood all the tablets and all. And all he's doing is picking out little phrases here and there and discrediting all of it to his own destruction. Peter says they twisted the scriptures to their own destruction. Friends, Billy, please, don't run around thinking you know it all, and now you're going to share this knowledge that you have, and this knowledge is to discredit the Bible? You're on very, very shaky ground. Not because our Heavenly Father is angry with you because you don't know something, but because in your pride, you have been lured into deceiving the world. Because Jesus is coming, friends. That's something that happens at the end. The appointed time for the Lord's second coming is a literal event that is yet to happen. Now, we're not going to be able to get through the book of Revelation. I wanted to read more of it, but we got it started. And we're going to go through the book of Revelation in the next video. And we're going to share with you how it demarcates things that happened that were, things that are, and things that are to come. And how John is telling us that there will be physical, literal things that will happen, that will be fulfilled. that will be indicating something that is a grand fulfillment that is happening in our hearts, that is happening in a spiritual sense. So I'm going to go ahead and leave it there, and we'll take it up where we left off, hopefully tomorrow, and we're going to get into the book of Revelation and demonstrate that we are now in the great tribulation. They've opened the bottomless pit. Satan's been thrown down, and Iran is about to attack. Really, it's Gog of Magog, and the allied forces of, Gog are going to attack Israel, and the 10 horns will burn her with fire. We'll see you tomorrow. May the Lord bless you, and he will. Have a good one.